Hi, so my textbook pages discuss three different types of adoption studies. So first I'm going to explain what niche picking is. So first of all, genes and environment are not completely independent of each other. They actually influence each other. So in order to see how the interaction between these factors develop dynamically is niche picking. So niche picking really is the phenomenon when genetic predisposition causes individuals to choose environments that affect their behavior. So it can help explain one property of heritability coefficients. So three experiments discussed in my textbook pages were the Bouchard and Magoo experiment in 1981, the Kendler et al. Study in 2015, and Scar and Weinberg in 1983. So the Bouchard and Magoo experiment conducted a meta-analysis of 111 studies on IQ correlations between relatives. The Kendler et al. Study had researchers conduct a designed adoption study of a sample of sibling pairs where one sibling was home reared and the other one was adopted away. And lastly, Scar and Weinberg reported on the results of two longitudinal studies that started in 1974. So these studies were the transracial adoption study and the adolescent adoption study. And these investigated the malleability of intelligence. So beginning with the results of the Bouchard and Magoo experiment, it showed that MZ twins share 100% of their genes since they developed from the same egg. DZ twins, siblings, and parents with biological children share 50% of their genes, and there is zero genetic similarity between adoptive parents and their adopted children. So if genes were the only thing causing IQ differences between people, MZ twins would have a perfect correlation of 1, DZ twins, siblings, and parents with biological children would have the second largest correlation, and adopting parents with adopted children would have a correlation of 0. So environment also contributes to the variability of IQ. So MZ twins reared together are expected to have a higher correlation than MZ twins reared apart because of exposure to a common environment. MZ twins reared together don't have a perfect correlation of IQ scores, and this demonstrates the influence of individual environments on IQ development. And lastly, if you put two values, so in this case, it was the correlation between MZ twins reared together and the correlation between DZ twins reared together. So if you put these two values into something called Falconer's formula, you'd obtain the estimated heritability of IQ. So based on the results from Falconer's formula, intelligence is 54% inherited. So the textbook mentioned 4 limitations that are seen in any twin study. So the assumption that similarity between MZ twins reared apart solely being due to genotype is limited. Twin studies are usually small in sample size and rare due to the uniqueness of the target group. Twins might not be representative of the general population. And lastly, similar features of the twins might elicit similar responses from the environment. So for example, attractive people are generally treated better than average-looking people. Adoption studies also provide a direct test of environmental malleability of cognitive abilities. So 2 aspects of adoption studies that may provide different angles on the nature-nurture problem are 1, computing the correlation between cognitive abilities of the adopted child and the adoptive parents, comparing that to the correlation between cognitive abilities of the adopted children and biological parents. Second aspect is comparing cognitive abilities of adopted children to those of their siblings who were not adopted but rather raised by their biological parents. So these 2 approaches yield contradictory results. So most of the existing studies actually support the idea that IQ is increased by adoption into more prosperous families. Together, the effects suggest the additive influence of genetics and environment on the development of intelligence. So basically, adopting into a higher SES family results in an increase of in IQ. So this increase could be higher or lower depending on the genetic inheritance of the child. So the Kendler et al. Study actually demonstrated this additive influence. So the results show that there was a modest correlation between the educational levels of biological and adoptive parents, which could suggest effects of selective placement. Also, the interpretation of the findings suggests that cognitive ability is environmentally malleable. And lastly, the results suggest an additive influence of environment and genetics, So the largest IQ scores were observed in adopted children from well-educated biological families that were adopted into well-educated families. So the two longitudinal studies that Scar and Weinberg reported on were the transracial adoption study and the adolescent adoption study. So the transracial adoption study was designed to see if Black children reared by white families performed on tests of IQ and school achievements as well as other adopters. And the adolescent adoption study looked at how differences in cognitive ability accumulate over years until adolescence. So the results of this experiment support the idea of additive influence of genetics and the environment to the development of IQ. So in this way, it corroborated the findings of Kendler et al. So researchers were able to conclude that the results may be due to niche picking. So young children reared in the same family are similar to each other, regardless of if they are genetically related or not, because they share a similar rearing environment. So the fact that biologically related children select similar environments is an example of niche picking. So in this way, genetically related people become more and more similar with age as the genetic program unfolds and the child begins to pick their niches in the environment. So this process can either strengthen or weaken the effects of the rearing environment.